12 people at Navy Yard. Essential personnel returned to work at the facility. Details of the tragedy are still coming out, but sadly, a growing body of work has revealed the mental health and emotional impacts that events like these have on their survivors and on their surrounding communities. We're joined today by Alan Lipman. He's a professor at George Washington University's Medical Center and the founder of the Center for the Study of Violence. Alan, thank you so much for joining me today. We will have people who are returning to work today, and if not today, certainly in the next weeks or so. What are they facing? What's the road ahead like?
Well, you start with a very important point. The fact is that in the days and weeks and months and years to come, looking at the past events and the research that we know, the fact is there are going to be very powerful psychological circumstances that come about as a result of these events. So first of all, the people at the Navy Yard who directly experienced these events, who were in the line of fire, who were hiding out, who didn't know whether or not they were going to be the next victim, these are people who studies show between 10 and 36%, 1 in 3, are likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder, which, as many may know, is a very serious disorder that involves powerful symptoms of anxiety, avoidance, depression, and these are things that many of the people, particularly those who come from a military culture, well, they might have heard of. They may not have experienced before at the Navy Yard, so it may strike them with a kind of surprise, and as we may talk about, a kind of embarrassment. Secondly, and I think less known to your viewers, is that the entire communities in these events are profoundly affected. It's been shown that after these mass shootings, that remarkable proportions of the communities experience anxiety, isolation, symptoms of depression, symptoms of withdrawal. There is an overarching effect of these events. They feel intruded upon, and we need to be aware that these are circumstances, these symptoms, for both groups, those in the line of fire and those in the community beyond. They last for a very long time. Once the camera crews and the focus is gone, longitudinal studies have shown that these last for as long as 3 years. So this is a very powerful and long-lasting problem that we are now faced with in this city.
And I talked to Frank DeAngelis, who was the principal at Columbine High School.
Right, I've also talked with Frank.
And he says that when events like this happen, these sort of mass shooting events, it re-triggers the event for him as well. And this was in 1999 that this event happened to him.
Another excellent point. What you are pointing to is this is a focal symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder. We refer to it in the field as traumatic re-experiencing of the event, which means that if you've been through a shooting or if you have been through another kind of disaster in your life, it's as if the mind can't let go, and both in dreams and in waking life, even the smallest reminder, a television story or a backfire going off, can remind you again and again and again of the event. Now look, if we intervene in the right way, both with those in the direct line of fire, the active shooter, and in the community, we can prevent these kinds of reactions right at the outset. But to do that, as in all of these circumstances, we have to make the community aware and make them aware in the right way. And there are certain ways to do that, if you'd like to discuss that as well.
Certainly. Talking to Alan Lipman here today, he's a psychologist, about the aftermath of the Navy Yard shooting. We want to turn now to Obama, President Obama, who spoke out about this tragedy yesterday. He has found himself in this position much too often as the consoler-in-chief of the nation.
That is true.
We are confronting yet another mass shooting. And today it happened on a military installation in our nation's capital. It's a shooting that targeted our military and civilian personnel. These are men and women who were going to work, doing their job, protecting all of us. They're patriots, and they know the dangers of serving abroad, but today they face the unimaginable violence that they wouldn't have expected here at home.
And what exactly is his role, and even the sort of national role that we all will play in helping this community and these survivors move forward?
That's a very important question. And, you know, we have seen these events in my own work, starting in 1998, beginning with Pearl and through Columbine, and each president has responded to them actually quite differently. I see President Obama as, first of all, playing a particularly effective and powerful role as being the nation's, as you, I think, aptly put it, consoler-in-chief, in that from the very beginning of his presidency, he has had a, what I regard as a profound mission to attempt to reduce the occurrence of these actions. Now, what we also see, undeniably, in his statement, in his attempt to console and unify the nation, is his abject frustration at the fact that, once again, when it is possible, through acts that now have been delineated through the greatest amount of empirical research, much of which I have done with many of my colleagues, and which is clear beyond doubt, that many of these incidents with these mass shootings can be predicted. In fact, usually, in almost all cases, as was seen in a study done by the U.S. Secret Service of most of these events, there is a sign beforehand. And if we use the combined tools of mental health and intelligent restrictions on weapons that need not be on the streets, we can drastically reduce these crimes. He clearly is aware of this, and he has taken a very strong shot at it. And now, with that effort having, for the time being, somewhat temporarily receded, you can see his frustration that has now occurred.
What is the common thread here in terms of the people who commit these crimes? You say that research suggests that there are signs that people can pick up on. Here we have a man named Alexis. He's 34. He was 34. He was 4 years, spent time as a Navy reservist, honorably discharged, had some brushes with the law. What do you think we don't know yet. I mean, all of this stuff is coming out, but what are the sort of common threads here in terms of the types of people? Just
to be clear, and these facts are always come out in a certain way where they change by the minute and the day and the hour. For example, there's always a question of multiple shooters that virtually always becomes one shooter. There's also a question of his honorable discharge as opposed to him being discharged less than honorably because of the 2 shootings that he engaged in Fort Worth and in Seattle prior to this incident. But let's get to the main question, which is the common thread. There is more than a suggestion of a common thread. There has been tremendous research, including the extensive Secret Service study that I referred to, as well as much research that has been done across the country, including my own, which shows the following. We can talk about this issue as involving 2 sets. One set, which President Obama tried to deal with, is the large, overarching, and wildly unrepresentative for the United States deaths due to firearms, which come about not largely as a bout of mental illness, except perhaps for an antisocial personality disorder, but largely because of a result of a propensity towards crime. Then we have these much less frequent, but characteristically different mass shootings. And in these mass shootings, in Columbine, in Aurora, in Sandy Hook, and as the days go on, it is beginning to be revealed, perhaps here as well, we have a combination of some form of untreated mental illness or undertreated mental illness combined with weapon availability. His father said that he had PTSD and an anger management problem. Right. Now, here's a person who was walking around. His father said that he had an anger management problem. Up until the days before, the people who knew him most closely said that, well, you know, I didn't necessarily see him as the kind of person who would murder anyone, but I certainly saw him as the kind of person who would commit suicide. This is a person who was seen as at risk. And if we look at Virginia Tech, if we look at Aurora, if we look at Pearl, if we look at Columbine, if we look at Paducah, if we look at Sandy Hook, I could go on. In each one of these shootings, there have been clear, in fact, clearer indicators that the individual who was going to commit them was displaying signs of a mental illness, right, was displaying signs of violence, and had stated his desire to commit a threat. Now listen, mental illness is typically not an indicator of violence, as the president has pointed out.
And people with mental illness more likely to be
group,
victims of violence.
Yes, as a group, people with mental illnesses are less likely to commit violence. But the people who commit these mass shootings, as a group, are people who, almost without exception, have been suffering from an untreated mental illness, typically either an untreated psychotic mental illness or a combination of some kind of depression and a kind of overwhelming rage, and we see it in each episode.
Alan, thank you so much for joining me today and for your insights.
It's a pleasure to talk with you.
Shooting at Navy Yard affected many in the community yesterday, including the surgeons charged with saving the lives of the wounded. Janice Orlowski, the chief medical officer at MedStar Washington Hospital Center, made this plea against gun violence.
There's something evil in our society that we as Americans have to work to try and eradicate. I'd like you to put my trauma center out of business. I really would.
The number of potential casualties in an active shooter situation has prompted experts to recommend that the public take action, running, hiding, and even fighting if facing a mass attack. Matt Masdam is a former Navy SEAL and former military aide to President Obama. He is also the CEO of Move to Safety, a program designed to train people to safely escape active shootings. Matt, thank you so much for joining me today. We heard over and over yesterday when this was going on from officials who were holding press conference and tweeting about this. The one phrase they kept using over and over was shelter in place. You seem to think that's not actually good advice.
Yeah, I think sheltering in place during an active shooting is akin to sheltering in place